He walked into the cafe and everyone went silent. His skin was blue. Blue like the midday sky. But this wasn't a costume or makeup. It was real and permanent. His name was Paul Karason. He lived in a small town in California and led an ordinary life until something inside him changed. At first it was just a faint grayish tone on his face. Then a bluish hue spread across his skin, like ink bleeding through paper. Before he knew it, his reflection was no longer his own. He wasn't sick. He felt no pain. But he carried on his body a color that modern medicine barely understood. Over time, Paul became a phenomenon. Headlines, interviews, memes. Some laughed. Others were afraid. But almost no one knew the truth behind that transformation. A truth involving personal choices, forbidden substances, and a silent warning about the thin line between healing and obsession. If stories like this fascinate you, subscribe to the channel now. But be warned, what you're about to hear defies medical logic. Paul Karason was never a vain man. He lived simply, dressed without pretension, and preferred to go unnoticed. But in 1994, something in the mirror made him flinch. The morning light hit his face in a strange way. His skin looked gray. As if dusted with a thin layer of metallic powder, he rubbed his face hard, washed it with soap, looked again. Nothing changed. In the days that followed, the color grew more intense. From gray, it shifted to a faint bluish tint, then a deeper, more vivid blue. Yuch, it wasn't a bruise. It wasn't an allergy. Shigem. It was something else, something coming from within. Paul tried to ignore it. He stuck to his routine, waking up early, reading the paper, having coffee. But everywhere he went, he felt the stares. At the grocery store, the pharmacy, even the gas station. Strangers looked at him like they were seeing a colored ghost. He began going out less, avoiding mirrors. But the change didn't stop. Contrary to what many believed, Paul wasn't born with that skin tone. Nor did he suffer from a rare genetic disorder. What was transforming him was hidden in bottles inside his own home. In the 1990s, Paul discovered colloidal silver, a substance sold as a miracle supplement, especially popular in alternative health circles. It claimed to cure everything: infections, respiratory issues, inflammation. Paul, who suffered from chronic sinus infections, saw silver as a solution. At first, he applied it topically. Later, he began ingesting it, daily, in small doses, for years. And that's how, little by little, cell by cell, the color of his body began to change. But Paul didn't realize what was happening right away. The transformation was subtle, insidious, almost unnoticeable at first. Only when the bluish hue became impossible to ignore did he begin to suspect that the cause might be the solution he took so faithfully. When he told close friends, the reactions were mixed. Some thought it was an allergy. Shindrala, Mord, Nord bien samsord, Nord bien sords. Others said it was nothing. Some even recommended more supplements, more natural remedies. He consulted doctors. Few could explain it clearly. Finally, one gave it a name: argyria, a rare and incurable condition caused by the buildup of metallic silver in the body. It settles in the skin, reacts with light, and permanently pigments the tissue. There was no going back. His face, his hands, his chest. Little by little, Paul's entire body turned blue. An irreversible change. An unintentional tattoo etched by time and choices. From that point on, his life would never be the same. And perhaps the hardest part of all would be how people reacted. Because no one is ever truly prepared to see a blue man walking down the street. In 2008, Paul Karason appeared on American television. Seated in front of the cameras on the Today Show, he looked calm. He wore a white shirt, modest glasses, but what no one could ignore was the intense bluish tone of his skin. A deep, metallic blue, almost unreal. When the host asked if he had any regrets, Paul hesitated. He said no. and that he was still taking colloidal silver. The internet exploded. News sites, blogs, medical forums. Everyone wanted to know who this blue man was. Memes flooded social media. Comparisons to fictional characters like Papa Smurf and Dr. Manhattan popped up everywhere. But Paul's story was anything but funny. He wasn't chasing fame. He didn't want attention. Yet there he was, on headlines across the country, becoming the face of a warning medicine had been shouting for decades. The irresponsible use of unregulated substances can change someone's life forever. But Paul didn't see himself as a victim. He believed in colloidal silver. He swore his health had improved after he started using it. His sinus infections became less frequent. But Paul dim. He felt more energetic. Amal Gaiman P. And despite everything, he said he didn't care much about his appearance. But not everyone around him felt the same. On the streets, people pointed. Some crossed to the other side of the sidewalk. Children cried or asked awkward questions. There were times Paul was refused entry into stores or restaurants. People thought he was sick, contagious, radioactive. And each new stare became a distorted mirror. Still, he didn't hide. He went to the market, the bank, the pharmacy. He faced the world with a rare kind of courage. Not the action hero type, but the quiet kind found in those who keep stepping outside, even when everything pushes them to stay inside. At the same time, fierce defenders and critics emerged. Alternative health communities saw Paul as living proof that natural remedies worked. Scientists and doctors, however, warned. He was the perfect example of what not to do. Paul was becoming a symbol. But a symbol of what? The freedom to choose your own treatment? Or the danger of straying too far from science? That ambiguity fueled the controversy. Meanwhile, Paul tried to live his life. Still alone. Few friends. Little family. The blue on his skin seemed to stain his relationships too. His routine. His silences. But one question haunted him more and more. What if the very thing that gave him color was also taking his life away? The bottle was always there. Live. On the kitchen counter, next to the stove. An amber glass jar with a clear liquid inside. To Paul Karason, it wasn't just a supplement, it was a ritual. Every morning, before even drinking coffee, he took his daily dose of colloidal silver. But what exactly was in that bottle? Colloidal silver is a suspension of microscopic silver particles in water. For centuries, it was used as an antiseptic, long before antibiotics. In the 20th century, it fell out of favor with the rise of modern medicine. But it never truly disappeared. In recent decades, it re-emerged as part of alternative medicine. It was claimed to fight viruses, bacteria, fungi, and to cure everything from colds to autoimmune diseases. Websites offered it as a miracle elixir. No prescription, no restrictions, no guarantees. It was on one of those sites that Paul first discovered the substance. He started using it occasionally, then regularly. Eventually, he decided to make his own colloidal silver at home using a small generator he bought online. The process was simple, at least on the surface. 2 silver electrodes immersed in distilled water, connected to an electric current. After a few minutes, the liquid took on a faint yellowish hue. That, according to the manuals, meant the particles were there, invisible, but present. The problem? The concentration. Without lab control, there was no way to know how much silver he was actually consuming. And in the human body, silver isn't metabolized, it accumulates. It stays in the tissues, and over time, it changes the color of the skin. Paul was literally dyeing himself from the inside out. But there was something even more concerning. Doctors began warning about internal side effects, heavy metal buildup in the liver, kidneys, even the brain. Although argyria itself doesn't cause pain or dysfunction, excess silver could trigger systemic toxicity. Paul met those warnings with skepticism. If it were that dangerous, I'd be dead by now, he would say. But medical exams started revealing abnormalities, unstable blood pressure, respiratory issues, neurological fluctuations. Still, he kept going. At every new appointment, he repeated, "I got better after the silver. I'm not stopping now. That unwavering belief, almost religious, was perhaps his greatest blind spot. Like many who dive deep into the world of alternative cures, Paul was searching for control. Aces gunulabi a latafiju, a sense of power over his own body that conventional medicine doesn't always offer. But that search, however legitimate, can become a trap. He was no longer drinking silver for prevention. It had become part of who he was, a liquid metallic identity running through his veins and showing on his skin. Once, a journalist asked him if he had any regrets. Paul took a deep breath, looked into the camera and said, "I don't regret taking it. I regret never asking enough questions." But it was too late. That liquid truth, clear, gleaming, and bright, had already turned into an eternal tattoo on his body, and into a dark reminder for the rest of the world. Because what the silver was doing on the inside was even more terrifying. On the outside, Paul Karason looked like a character out of a science fiction novel. But the question many doctors began to ask was something else entirely. What about the inside? Was the blue skin just the surface of something much deeper? It was during a routine checkup that this doubt became real. Paul had begun feeling unusually tired, short of breath, with occasional heart palpitations. Basic tests revealed something wasn't right. His heart was under stress. His blood pressure was unstable. His oxygen levels were lower than normal. A cardiologist ordered more invasive tests, CT scans, MRIs, detailed blood analyses. And the results shocked even the most experienced specialists. Traces of silver had been found in his internal tissues. Not just in the skin, but in the kidneys, the liver, even the brain. It was as if the blue had crossed the boundary of the skin. As if that metallic shimmer was infiltrating the most delicate machinery of the human body. There was no treatment, no antidote. The human body doesn't have effective ways to eliminate accumulated metallic silver. What enters, stays, and over time, that buildup can impair essential functions. Paul listened to the diagnoses with a mix of denial and resignation. He said he wasn't afraid, but there was something deeper in his eyes, like someone who realizes too late that he's opened a door that can no longer be closed. Medicine had only documented a few severe cases of argyria in the world. Most came from industrial accidents or accidental ingestion. But Paul was different. He had willingly introduced silver into his body every day for years. It was an unintentional experiment, a living study, a cruel reminder of what happens when certain boundaries are crossed. Doctors began discussing the possibility of neurological effects, mood changes, memory lapses, depressive episodes. Paul grew increasingly withdrawn, increasingly quiet. He lived alone in a small apartment with few connections. The blue was no longer just a color. It was a barrier between him and the world. In a late interview, Paul shared that he sometimes dreamed in colors, but never in blue. "In my dreams, I'm the color I used to be," he said. And for a moment, the studio went silent. That confession said it all. He didn't hate the blue, but he missed who he used to be, the old reflection in the mirror, the face others once recognized. Still, Paul kept fighting. He refused invasive treatments, turned down strong medications. He firmly believed that his health was still good, that the problem was purely cosmetic. But the medical reports told a different story. The silver was there. In his blood, his tissues, his organs, blue on the inside too. And with each new test, the weight of his choices became harder to ignore. But perhaps the cruelest part of all was the fact that he knew. He knew there was no going back. He knew his body was marked. And yet he kept moving forward. Because sometimes, continuing is the only way to resist. But the world didn't see courage. It only saw the color. Being different comes at a cost. And Paul Karason paid that price every single day in his skin, quite literally. In the final decade of his life, Paul slowly withdrew from the world. Not out of shame, but out of exhaustion. Every outing was an exposure. Every conversation, an explanation. Living with blue skin was like carrying an invisible sign that read, "I am not like you." A job? Hard to keep. Relationships? Nearly impossible. Friendships? Few could withstand the constant strangeness. Even those who knew him before struggled to adjust to his new appearance. But the isolation wasn't just social. It was emotional, too. Paul moved to a small town in the state of Washington. There he found a kind of anonymity. Few people knew his story. Living in what felt like self-imposed exile, he spent his days in silence, listening to music, reading, watching the sky. Some neighbors remember him as a kind but somber man. He spent silence, a man who didn't talk much but smiled with his eyes, watching. A man who had accepted his condition but carried an invisible weight. In 2013, Paul's health suddenly took a turn for the worse. Pneumonia, a stroke, cardiac complications. He was admitted to a local hospital, alone. Shortly after, the news came. Paul Karason had died at the age of 62. The official cause of death wasn't argyria, but few doubted that the years of silver accumulation and ingestion had contributed to his fragility. The blue skin didn't kill Paul, but it stayed with him until the end, like a colored shadow that never left. In the days following his death, news outlets retold his story, but few mentioned the most important part. Paul didn't want to be remembered as the Blue Man. He wanted to be remembered as a man who believed, until the very end, in the right to choose his own path, even if that path left him unrecognizable. Paul Karason became a human enigma. A man who believed so deeply in a cure that he ended up becoming it, in body and soul. His story isn't about a foolish mistake or a shady product. It's about how far we're willing to go to regain control over our own bodies. He sought health and found a reflection he no longer recognized. He sought freedom and became a prisoner of a color he couldn't erase. And still, he moved forward, because in the end, maybe that was all he had left. Medicine studied him. The media exploited him, but few ever truly listened. What if it were you? What if, in trying to heal, you drifted further from everything that made you who you are? How far would you go for a promise of wellness? Paul leaves us with a lesson, not about the dangers of silver, but about the power and the risk of the choices we make with the bodies we live in. If this story moved you, subscribe now. Medicine still holds secrets you need to hear, because sometimes the difference between healing and tragedy is just one drop.